Hello. 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 Ah, there we go. Okay, sorry, I was a little rotated there. Can bring it down a tiny bit. Hello. We're at proper volume now. So, welcome. Hi, wonderful people of Art 107. It's good to see you today on this Thursday, February 10th. So, you might be asking yourself, this seems different from our regular pre-lecture, not really important video. And I say yes. I just like it. I've been watching it a lot at home, and it's a good thing to have on in between, watching the news or whatever other terribly dramatic things you might watch. I have been thinking, though, that maybe it might be fun to think about how being an artist is a little bit like being a jellyfish. Okay, let me tell you, I have three things that artists and jellyfish have in common. Jellyfish are really sensitive and they can't live outside of water, right? So artists also tend to be really sensitive, tend to kind of put their feelers out to the world and receive all that stuff. Third thing, second thing that artists and jellyfish have in common would be filtering. The jellyfish are filtering, obviously, like all this wonderful stuff from the sea, like diatoms and little bacteria type, scale organisms. And artists are really kind of doing that with life and the visual culture that surrounds us, right? We're always getting bombarded by constant imagery and constant experiences, right? Because we're going through the world with our sort of sensory apparatus mounted to our head. And we're just like, collect. And if you're an artist, eventually you take all that stuff that you collect and you pick one or two things and you make something out of it. Third thing, profit. No, that's an inside joke. If anybody, there really is not a third thing. It's just those two things. So, today, we're going to be picking up where we left off in Photoshop. And before I begin, I want to ask, does anyone have any questions? I don't have the long litany of announcements before we begin. I just had jellyfish today. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started then. We'll get started with my stupid collage. Has anyone seen that meme of taking a stupid walk for my stupid mental health? That's literally like my favorite meme in the world right now. I found out that the music that meme is set to is actually like a Turkish techno group called, I can't remember, it sounds like Volpa Meda, I think. And yeah, anyway. So when we left off, we had created a canvas for our background, or for our sort of, container to basically hold all these images. And we also went ahead and brought in this sort of image from my personal stash that was basically like a bunch of cats sort of flying and tumbling. You may notice that this is actually part of what kind of got me on that jellyfish trip. So I actually made a random association, which is a really common sort of tactic that artists make, particularly artists like the Surrealists or the Dadaists, where they take something and they just kind of like wait for something to pop up into their mind, like, oh, that looks kind of like a school of jellyfish. So it just so happened I had been looking at jellyfish anyway, and so I made that connection. Those are the kinds of connections that you may make in this work, because we're not asking you to pre-plan something. We're asking you to combine images that you just kind of find, or maybe images that you randomly occur in your mind. You say, I want tree. I also want, dog, or whatever. In other words, things that do not necessarily have a relationship. And we're asking you to sort of open your mind to what might happen if you allow them to have a relationship visually. So you may also recall, if I do a little tiny review here, that we used the magic wand tool to select the pink background of this image, and then we added it to a layer mask. Don't worry, we'll be doing that multiple times, probably today. So we'll go ahead and review some of these processes that we covered last class. So it just so happens that I have a folder of more images. And this may look more or less like your folder of images, because you need certainly more than one image here. The only sort of parameter that I had for selecting these images was that I knew, for the purposes of this demonstration, that I wanted images that were different in subject and also different in terms of the way that they looked, so that I could show you a variety of situations to use selection tools and other things like that. So I have a fern leaf here. It's from my sort of art library of images that I use as source material. Another fern that's treated in a completely different way. This fern is actually it's a print of a fern. In other words, someone back in the 1800s actually took a fern leaf, applied ink to it, splatted it down on a piece of paper, ran it through a press, and this is the result. So this is from the New York Public Library. So this is a fairly high-resolution image. You can see it's like about 4,200 by 5,900 pixels. So it's got excellent resolution. And it's also got another thing going for it, and that is that it has a white background. So this image actually should be pretty easy to work with. This image, much more challenging, but not that much more challenging. I got some, guess what I got? I got some jellyfish. Shocker. This is an image of a horseshoe that is just a kind of personal possession of mine. And it is, there's a piece of candy there too. And this is what happens if you take a desktop scanner, like with glass, and you put stuff on it, and then you make a scan. So it's sort of like a photograph, but it's got a different look because the scanner actually shoots light at every little piece of the image. Jellyfish. Cats behaving like jellyfish. This is actually a sample that I whipped up in my office about an hour ago. So I did want to sort of just show you what you can do with creating variations from the same source material. So we'll maybe look at that again later. Here's my actual collage file. This is the interior of a Victorian-era greenhouse that is somewhere in England. And then I had this screenshot of a student's artwork. And I also have this vulture, sort of, which was, I remember the story behind this image. I was barbecuing, and this vulture was extremely interested in that. So it started circling above my grill, and it seemed the kind of thing that I should take a picture of. So yeah, so this is basically sort of like the images that we have to work with. Could we have more? Of course we could have, you can always have more. Could we have less? We're probably not going to use all of these. We're probably going to omit some. I would suggest that when you're collecting images that you err on the side of collecting too many and not using them all, because that way you have choices. If you have too few images, it's going to be sort of a bummer to say, well, maybe I want to do this thing, but I can't because I don't have the right image. Go out and get an image. It's super easy. Google is at your fingertips. So yeah, so let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop. So I think what I want to sort of do first is Before I go much further with this file, there's really nothing wrong with what's going on here. This is all sort of fine. I'm OK with it. We have this layer mask. That looks just fine. The background layer, however, though, is locked right now. And it would probably be a prudent idea to unlock the background layer. You can see that when you unlock it, it converts it into a sort of standard layer. There are lots of situations where you would want the background layer to be locked. However, making a multi-photo composition is probably not one of them. So situations where I would have the background layer locked would be like, maybe I'm working more as a photographer. Back in the days, I used to do product photography. And I want to take a photograph and make some changes to it on a separate layer. And I want to lock the background layer because that's like my original, and I want to save it. That would be a good scenario for having the background locked. In this case, and what we're doing in this class, for the most part, you pretty much never want or need the background to be locked. So we converted it to layer 0. Also, just a quick refresher if you're catching up with the videos. The workspace that you're working in is really, really important. And if you're not seeing things on the screen that I have on my screen, you may go to Window Workspace and select the Essentials workspace. And if you have the Essentials workspace already selected, but you don't have the options that I have, you might want to consider using the Reset Essentials feature. Now, that being said, I have made some slight changes, like I think I flew this out. So in any case, we're kind of back at the ranch here. And right now, we have our background layer selected over here. So if I use the Move tool, and the Move tool is sort of like my go-to tool for selecting and, big surprise here, moving objects. With the Move tool, you can, obviously, you can see I can move the background layer all around. What color do you want your background layer to be? I don't know, maybe white is useful for a lot of things. I probably will keep mine white. You can also opt to just have it be entirely transparent. And so to do that, I would just probably actually just delete this layer entirely by dragging it to the trash. You can also fill it with black, any color you like. White does have certain efficiencies, which we'll talk about as we kind of develop this composition. The reason why I commonly work with white in a situation like this as a background is because when you start to use the layer blending modes, they tend to work the most predictably on top of a white background. OK, so we also have this, as you can see, this layer that moves around. And you can see here we can kind of see the edges of the layer by moving it around. But let's say maybe we don't want to move it. We can click this box called Show Transform Controls. And that is going to kind of open up like a whole world of potential for us. You can toggle these transform controls on and off. You may notice that as I work through some of the things we do today, I'm going to be toggling them on and off just for convenience sake. So I'm going to go ahead and make this layer invisible for now. And I'm going to go to my cat layer. And I can select the layer by going over here to the Layers palette. If I move it back on the other layer, I can also select any layer in the composition by hovering my mouse over it and right-clicking or control-clicking. And it will give me a listing of the layers that my cursor is over. That is like just a super awesome shortcut that keeps you from kind of dragging yourself all the way back here when you're working. So here I can just select my Kitty 1451 layer. OK, so I am going to open some of those files that I opened before. And let's see, excuse me, blurriness there. I'm going to go ahead and open up these 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead and open up this 2 fern leaves. And I'm going to go ahead just using the Command key to open multiple files at once. So I'm going to open up these 5 files. Those are the ones that I've decided that I want to work with. And I should see here I get multiple tabs, right, with all the files that I just opened. Let's go ahead and maybe try this one first. So again, this image, just like the sort of kitty image that we looked at, is going to be pretty simple to select, relatively speaking. We're going to be able to use the Magic Wand tool. Now, as we talked about last time, you can use the Magic Wand tool on the object itself, but that's kind of tedious and annoying because you have to sort of select through, all of these variations in the tone of the object. If we just go ahead, and I'm going to hit Command D to undo my selection, or deselect. If I just go ahead and select the white area, it's going to be much more efficient. And I can also then go to the similar function under the select menu. That backfired a little bit. I can undo that. So right now you notice that the tolerance of my tool is set quite high. That's kind of a good thing when you're doing your initial selection, because it's basically saying, hey, if you're white, if you're like this color white, and there are other very similar colors of white next to you, go ahead and select those, because my threshold is up. If you want to be a little bit more delicate, you can lower that threshold to, let's say, something like 10. And now when we go to select similar, it should be a little bit less aggressive. And you can see that it doesn't select all of that white adjacent stuff. So this is like looking pretty respectable in my book. There's a couple of little areas that we could work on. Let me show you how to kind of fine-tune this. So this white is the area that is selected. So if we wanted to add some areas to that, we have the addition mode. You can see the little plus sign under my cursor. The addition mode is selected right now, so we could add these in by just clicking through them. These little sparkles are what I like to call them. Do these sparkles matter? It depends on what scale you're going to be reproducing this at. If you're reproducing it at this scale, then yeah, they definitely matter. Are you reproducing it at like postcard size scale? They probably don't matter at all. So you just kind of have to make that judgment. Also, we can sort of omit things from this selection. And so we can do that by changing the mode here to subtraction mode. Let me give you a hint. If one of these modes is not working, just pick the other one. Because it's kind of a 50-50 chance of being right, whether it's adding or subtracting to your selection. I definitely would kind of get in here and take some of this stuff out of the selection. Now, this can be quite tedious if you're doing it with the Magic Wand tool. Another way of doing this is to enter what's called Quick Mask mode. And Quick Mask mode gives you a way of sort of previewing in really clear visual terms what is part of your selection and what is not part of your selection. And so really all I want, folks, is like this part of the fern, and now I've gotten all this other stuff in here. So what can I do about that? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of roughly select the fern. And I'm going to do that using the rectangular lasso. The rectangular lasso is probably my second favorite tool in Photoshop because it's just so simple and it's so easy to use, and it's like you can just power through things. So that's great. I've selected that, but that doesn't really correspond to my actual selection. OK, let's work on that. So if I want to actually select this and then make it impact the selection, you can use the sort of concept of erasure or painting with the brush to address that. So in this case, I selected this part right here, but what I actually want to delete from the selection is everything else, okay? So every time you select in Photoshop, you have the option of inverting your selection. It's a really good idea in a lot of cases. Remember when we selected the background of the cats? Well, if I had wanted to select the cats instead of the background, the best way to do that would have been to select the background and then invert it to actually select the cats. So here, I'm going to select inverse, and you can see now all of this stuff is selected. So if I just hit the delete button and fill it with really anything, white in this case, then now when I go back out of Quick Mask, you can see that this is sort of my sole selection, right? Could I have done that without using Quick Mask? Yeah, it just would have maybe been a little bit more tedious. Now, what else can we do with Quick Mask that's kind of awesome? Quick Mask is perfect for dealing with areas like this. This stuff. So this kind of stuff, these aren't sparkles, these are more like snargles or something, I don't know. And basically, I would just take the brush tool and work through this right here. It looks like my brush is a little bit big to kind of deal efficiently with this stuff. So probably if I have a slightly different, slightly thinner brush, I can kind of get through these areas. And again, I'm not great at drawing with the trackpad, but even if you're not so great at drawing with the trackpad, you can do this. And I'm just going to go ahead and, roll some of these white bits back into the selection. How obsessive do you need to get with this? It's kind of a personal decision. Like I said, thinking about the scale that you're going to use this image at is probably the best way. Hey, guess what? I totally messed up just now. Oh, that's terrible. So I did it on purpose so I could show you how to fix it. So let's go to the eraser. And again, choose a brush. So your eraser is right here. And we can take the eraser and actually, bring things back in the other direction. So if you have, little yellow dots like this, you could use your eraser, a slightly smaller eraser, to touch that up. And this stuff right here. Now, I am not going to crawl down the rabbit hole of fixing this entirely because we have better things to do today. So I think I have a selection now that looks, decent enough, and I could go out of Quick Mask now. You can see here that I could, let's see strategically, I could do a couple of things. Usually what I like to do when I'm working with source material is I like to make my layer masks actually in the file with the source material. And that's so that I can sort of reuse it later without going to a composition file. So here, if I were to make a layer mask, and in this case, you can see it looks like I have everything selected but the fern. So that's all the stuff that I would want to hide. So I can go in here to layer mask, hide selection. It did a couple of things. It unlocked my background layer, converted it to a layer, and added a layer mask. Cool. So why is that useful? Well, it's useful because if I save this as its own file, then I sort of have this pre-baked cookie getting, and I can add it to any meal that I want, right? It's sort of like having frozen peas in your freezer, right? And being able to shake them into a bunch of different casseroles. It's a very similar concept. So basically, at this point, I can take this layer and drag it back into my stupid collage for my stupid mental health. It's giving me this message about the target document has a different depth than the source document. Yes, I would like to proceed. That just means that, like I said before, it was from the New York Public Library, so it was scanned with a really high-end scanner, and it probably was at a slightly different quality. So you can see here, this image is coming in as being really quite large. And you can also see that the Show Transform Controls box is enabled, so you can zoom out and you can see how large this thing actually is. It's a bit larger than our composition. I mean, what's wrong with that? Absolutely nothing. We can make it smaller, and we can sort of do a tiny bit of resampling there. And that's totally fine. I actually kind of like it as a large thing and might retain that. Now, one thing about scaling with the transform controls, you may notice that the transform controls will scale proportionately if you do nothing and just grab a corner. They'll maintain the proportions of the object. If you hit the Shift key, you can start to do stuff like this. Is that bad? Is that good? It's like a creative choice, I guess. I mean, I can think of a lot of reasons why you would want to do that. Like maybe you have a cat who looks really symmetrical and you want to kind of stretch her out a little bit to make her look like a Siamese cat. Great, go for it. But if you do want your file to stay proportional, just remember that, keep your hands off the keyboard and it'll stay proportional. Also, when you bring layers in and you're using these transform controls, don't forget that there's this sort of box to check here. So you can check accept to commit the transformation. Probably classic introduction to Photoshop Blender, and I do it myself, is to not click this box and then to be like, hey, how come nothing's working and I can't do anything? It's because you didn't click the box. So that box has got to be clicked. OK, so let's go ahead and grab just a couple more images. I've got this image. This image seems kind of nice. So this one I'm just going to drag straight in because I don't plan on masking this image out. Why am I not planning on making a mask of this image? Well, let's take a look at it. Why am I not masking that? Because it would be like almost impossible. The reason I'm not masking this is because I guess I could maybe mask out like certain areas of it by maybe selecting like this guy or this guy. Could I sort of say select all the jellyfish? No, not really. And the reason is because I have all of these blurry jellyfish back here, and when objects are blurry in a scene and you attempt to mask them, it just is kind of awful. There are ways to do it, but it's really difficult, and the result usually is not very good. So in this case, especially in areas like this, the selection tools would not know the difference between this and this and this and this and this. Again, the selection tools don't understand human object identification. They're algorithmic tools that are made to see edges. So when you feed them objects that don't have edges, hilarious things happen. So what am I going to do with this? Well, I think for now I'm going to make it invisible, and I'm just going to kind of keep it on the sidelines there. So certainly when you're piling things together in Photoshop, you may want to make one or more layers invisible. Oh, I think we also had our roof. So here's another object that I'm going to be making a layer mask of. And with this object, I would start with my magic wand tool. And you can see we've set the tolerance low, remember, to make it more delicate. I could put it back up in this case, because here we have a really clear definition between background and not background. So we can have this nice and high and not worry about what's going on with everything else. So I could hit the Shift key, And I could continue to hit the Shift key to put it in additive mode up here, or you could click the button. I could also just say select similar, which is sort of like my favorite trick this semester, apparently. And gosh, I don't know, that looks pretty decent. There's a couple areas that could use some improvement. So I could scoot into the quick mask and go ahead and use my paintbrush tool. And I'm going to use a much larger brush. By the way, guess what else you can do with Quick Mask? You can take a large paintbrush, like really large paintbrush. Let's lower the hardness to nothing, and let's also lower the opacity. So I'm going to sort of paint in like so that it has a little bit of the image left. And I'm treating it just like a real paintbrush. Like, you have to like make a crazy noise when you do it, because that way you're, really invested. I'm sort of making fun of painters just a tiny bit. It's out of love, y'all. So yeah, basically I'm just kind of like roughing in the center here, and I'm using a brush with really low opacity, and I'm kind of building it up so that it doesn't look, you can't see a line, basically. Also, the hardness of the brush is helping with that. So it's going to get denser and denser, but it's going to take a couple of, goes to get that. Now, if I go into Quick Mask, or out of Quick Mask, you can see that these areas in here are now mostly selected. So what am I going to do? Well, now if I go into Layer Mask, and in this case, we want to hide the selection, you can see that I actually retained some of that image data, right, in the center. So that's actually one of the most awesome things that you can do in Quick Mask, is you can just take a giant brush and say, I want to kind of blurrily select the bottom of an image. Great, sure. That's one of the things that Quick Mask is really good at. So let's take this and let's drag it into our stupid collage for our stupid mental health. And we have it right there. So I think I'm going to get this fern out of the way, because it's sort of like dominating right now. And I'm going to go ahead and drag this down a little bit. I actually like this composed vertically because it emphasizes these sort of details, and it also emphasizes like the angles in a kind of off-center way, which creates kind of a dynamic quality to the composition. Let's bring this back. I'll go ahead and get that. I'll get everything out of the way except for the layer that I'm working on. That's a kind of just a strategy that I use, because I get really confused and it gets really difficult to select things and all that stuff. So until I'm really thinking about how things fit together, I'm usually just working on one layer at a time. And also, now this is a really common situation that creates kind of a mess up for people. I get emails about this. I can't select the layer, I can't do anything to this layer, but I can see it. What is going wrong? What am I doing? Well, self, you forgot to select the layer. So that's just kind of one of those classic blunder. So yeah, basically here, I think I'm going to take this image and I'm going to go ahead and make it quite a bit larger. Is that okay? Is that not okay? I'm definitely pushing it past the point of, possibly pushing it past the point of okay, but let's see how Photoshop handles it. Let's see how it looks at full quality. At 100%. Oh yeah, that's fine. Why do I say, oh yeah, that's fine? Well, it's got a little bit of graininess. That's actually film grain, because it was probably shot with a camera with actual film, if anybody remembers that. So that looks like film grain to me. That doesn't look like digital noise. The other reason why I know it was shot with a camera is that it has dust particles on it. So this is probably like an old school photographic print. The other reason why I'm not super concerned about the quality for this is that it's going to be in the very background. So people are really not going to be able to see it. It's just going to provide some kind of color and stuff like that. So can go ahead and leave this up for now. I'll bring this up. And, whoops, excuse me. Go ahead and move this. Somehow I accidentally moved it off. OK, so here it looks like you can see that the jellyfish are actually just kind of barely peeking through right now. I might move this over here, because I think we'd get more coverage of the jellyfish without this burlap blob in the way. Now, my sort of intention with this, I think, all along was to take this roof image and use what's called a layer blending mode. And so any layer in Photoshop, you can go up to this menu, and you can assign it a layer blending mode. You can see some of them are pretty extreme. Some of them are like, gee, if I were doing like a 90s electronica cover, maybe this would be excellent. And some of them are, sort of like just really basic. This one takes the layer that this is covering and makes it lighter. This one does pretty much the same thing. So I think I'm probably going to pick one of these lightening modes. Not that I like to spend hours just working on, Photoshop. Well, technically, I guess I do. But you could literally spend like a lot of time navigating all of these different modes. Probably some of the highlights, if you want to kind of read the cliff notes of the blending modes. Darken is a really popular. Darken and multiply are really popular. They sort of take both of the images and add them to each other for the brightness of their brightness channels. Lighten and screen are another sort of like mode that's really popular. Overlay is a mode that is really popular. It creates kind of a moody look. Another one that's also really popular is luminosity. And then there's also color. And these color blending modes can do some really interesting things, where basically they're only taking the color channels of the image and adding them to the image underneath. So also, layer blending modes are really not about the layer on the top only. They're about how the layer on the top interacts with the layer underneath it. So if you have a light or dark layer underneath, you'll get radically different results. So let's go with screen for now. And now these two layers, I think, are kind of going to function as like my background. So these are pretty much done. I think it would be probably kind of useful to go ahead and take these two layers and group them. So when you create a group, and I can create a new group from layers, creating a group in Photoshop basically just gives you the ability to treat multiple layers as a single entity. So if you want, you can move them around together. That was possibly a mistake. You can move them around together. You can apply effects to them. You can basically treat them like they're one layer, but there's still two different layers, and you can go back afterwards and pull them out or do other stuff to them. So it's really flexible. If we bring back our sort of kitty layer here, and you may notice, obviously, that our kitty layer does not seem to be showing, and that's for a very obvious reason. It's because I sort of settled it underneath that group. So if I want to move it, I can just push it up the chain of events here and the layers, and I can certainly affect the stacking. I'm going to get rid of this fern, and I wanted to do one thing with this kitty grouping. So, and then we'll work on this a little bit more next class. So the main thing that I wanted to do with this kitty grouping, I'll go ahead and isolate it by don't delete, by making invisible the other layer. I wanted to take this kitty group and spread it apart into 2 distinct layers so that I could sort of have more space between the swarms of cats. And in order to do that, I'm going to do one quick thing here. I'm going to look at the layer, and I'm going to go into the layer mask, and I'm going to actually apply the layer mask. So by applying the layer mask, I sort of baked the layer mask onto that layer. So it is not coming off ever. I basically deleted the pixels that when the layer mask is applied, you can change it around, you can edit it, it's very flexible. But you can, if you decide that you're done with the layer mask and that you're not going to need to edit it anymore, you can apply it. And that basically just creates a situation where I can really easily take my polygonal lasso tool. Did I already mention it's my favorite tool? So I need to zoom in here because I got to get this. There's not very much tail space here. Okay. And then zoom back out. And I'm just going to come up here and finish the selection. Woo! Sorry, getting a little wild here on the trackpad. If I finish the selection, you notice that several tools in Photoshop work this way. You can see the little loop, the little O underneath that. That means that you're finishing something or that you're kind of connecting something in Photoshop. So there's my selection, and I can wait for it. I can cut and paste. In that case, I actually copied and pasted. I can also cut and paste rather than copy and paste. And you can see it just pasted it onto a new layer, and it's totally independent now. So cutting and pasting in Photoshop is totally a thing. You can totally do it. Yeah. And I think that's all we're going to have time to cover for today. There's a lot more stuff, but I think that's pretty much it for now. My only sort of critique of this image at this point is that I think it would be kind of nice to have some sort of like other image that the cats are framing. So we'll probably insert that next class. Have a fantastic weekend, everyone, and enjoy your Photoshop experience.